I used to think my life was a line drawn in ash, from the cauldron to the crossroads, from lesson to lesson, from oath to oath, always straight, always forward, always toward one impossible point on the horizon, the unmaking of time. Then I stood before him, and the line I had followed since childhood burned away like dry straw. There was no straight path, only a circle that kept closing around me. That was the moment I understood the first truth of my life. If I remained what I was made to be, I would never escape him. To face the Titan of time, I could not stay a pupil of time-worn answers. I had to become a thing he did not expect. Sit closer. The coals are honest company. Hear them spit when a bit of resin finds a pocket of heat. Smell the herbs, moly, cinder, and sea moss steaming in the kettle. Feel how the night in the crossroads settles on the shoulders, heavy but not cruel, and how the wards hum like bees in the hedges when an omen passes. I have spoken so many incantations that my breath still tastes of ash and silver, but this is not a spell. This is my story, and if it has power, it will be because I finally speak it in my own voice. Moonlight guide you. That's how we greet one another here. Old habits cling like smoke. I learned the habit from the woman who rescued me and set me to my task. The one I called headmistress long after I should have learned to call her by her true name. Hecate forged my days like a smith tempers iron. Heated, hammered, quenched, tested, then back to the coals. She gave me structure because the world I was born to had none left. My cradle was a stolen moment. My inheritance was a portrait with faces I did not know. My birthright was a war whose first charges had already trampled the garden. You wonder what it is to be raised at the crossroads. Imagine a place that is not a place, a border given boundary by will. Paths from upper air and lower dark meet here and ask permission to continue. We keep tents and tables as if they were walls, and we pretend that a hedge of herbs is a fence and a warding circle a door. I grew to the sound of mortals who no longer breathe, gods who no longer boast, and familiars who have never known anything but us. If you listen, you will hear Chronos in the rushes by the pond, a single croak every few breaths to remind us that life is stubborn. I like to think he chooses his moments for emphasis. From the first, my life was a list, the 16 basic wards every child of the underworld should know by instinct, the 7 incantations you never cast without a second, the 9 ways a promise fails, and the 1 way it holds no matter what. Hecate taught me to arrange the world in measures, half-breaths and quarter turns, the count before the strike, the pause before the glamour seals. She corrected my stance with a touch to the shoulder, the elbow, the heel. She corrected my thinking with questions that were as gentle as a whip. Do you understand the cost? Do you know where this power goes when you let it through? Do you know who pays? It took me longer than it should have to ask. Do you? You see the arm. People try not to look and then can't help it. Green and clear, the bones lit from within like a lantern's ribs. I call it mine because it does what I ask, and because I have paid for it, twice over, but it was not born with me. I made a promise to a shade who once had a boy's name and a sky under his feet, and I reached farther than my training, and the cauldron took what it needed to balance the books. Pain teaches quickly. Afterward, I learned to move with the new limb, 1 seed of time at a time. I learned how magic flows when bone remembers the old way and flesh remembers nothing. I learned to feel for fractures that are not bone but will, and I learned that every spell is a choice, and that I had been making choices since childhood without calling them by their true names. Death to Chronos. That was the greeting too. You would think we carved it on our bread. We said it the way farmers say rain or sailors say wind. We needed to believe that the word death could be applied to time as to anything else, that a blade could define an ending even for a thing that measures them. When I was smaller, the words tasted like iron and made my tongue feel brave. Later, they tasted like chalk. Later still, I stopped tasting them and started asking who taught me to swallow. Hecate did not suffer wasted breath. She trained me to cross an arena with the economy of a hawk's shadow. She lectured me on the difference between power and spectacle, and scolded me when I admired the wrong thing. She drilled the returns into me until the words became muscle. Return to shadow now. There is an art to dying and a discipline to waking. She said it with the same tone she used to say, eat your stew while it is hot. Order is order. It is the student who adds drama. Some nights her hand would rest on my shoulder a heartbeat longer than instruction required. Some mornings I woke to find the ash circle smudged where she had sat to watch me breathe. I am not blind. I was only young, and young minds confuse restraint for indifference and distance for disdain. If I had known how to read the silent grammar of her care, I might have turned toward the woman sooner and away from the idol sooner still. A perfect teacher is as dangerous as a perfect enemy. You do not forgive either of them anything, and you do not ask either of them enough. I knew the names in the portrait before I learned the names of the trees in Erebus. Father, mother, brother. I said them as if they were directions to a place the map did not show. I stared at paint and called it longing because I needed a word and had been given none better. When he first spoke to me, my father, not the paint, I heard the weight in his voice and the rust of despair, and a piece of me shrank like damp ash. Kings in paintings do not plead. Men in chains do. It is a mercy, in its way, to be disappointed by the truth. You cannot love a symbol. You can only carry it until your back breaks. By then, I had learned to walk the underworld as if I belonged there. The thicket of Erebus teaches patience. The reeds of Oceanus teach breath. The morning fields teach that sorrow, given time, will eat even its own name. In Tartarus, Time himself has laid out carpets of hourglass sand and gilded the chains with his own pride. Each place speaks its lesson, whether you listen or not. I learned to listen because Hecate had taught me to be embarrassed by ignorance. I learned to move because standing still is a kind of death, and I had enough of those already. My first guardian was the one who raised me. Of course it was. The woman who knows your stance knows where your balance breaks. The woman who taught your breath knows when you will hold it too long. She said things like, again and better, and you are not hurt, you are learning. And I tried very hard to keep the learning inside my ribs, where she could not see it tremble. When I finally surpassed one of her measures, there was a small smile like the edge of a crescent, and the world made a new shape around it. That is how children are paid, a fraction of moonlight, banked like coin. You want blood and boasting from the battles. You will get neither. A boast is a lie told to the self, and blood is never only yours. What I can tell you is how focus feels when it arrives, how the air goes smooth, how sound curls inward, how the moment opens like a door and invites you to be precise. I learned to step within the precise and let the world blur at the edges. I learned to stitch a circle under my feet so the ground itself remembered me and kept me standing. I learned to call a glamour, not to trick an eye, but to remind a heart of something it had forgotten to fear. Everything I am is arranged around remembering and reminding. That is what witches do. We place things back in their proper sequence, or we refuse to, and take responsibility for the disorder. You will ask about the surface. Everyone does, even those who have never seen the sky. The first time the curse let me through, it did not feel like a gate opening. It felt like a law deciding, briefly, to look the other way. The air above tasted thin and wet, and the light had edges that made my eyes ache. Houses stood with their mouths open to the street, as if their owners had left in the middle of a word and never returned. The city's name was Ephira. It sounded like a basket you would use to bring herbs home, light and woven and easy to carry. It was not light anymore. Souls stuck in flesh is a phrase, until you see the way hands keep moving in habits that mean nothing. A broom lifts, a baker's arm scatters a pinch of what is not flour. The old woman hums what is not a song. When the order of death is broken, death becomes a child, heedless, noisy, intent on itself. I was trained to save gods. The surface taught me to save those who cannot even name what has been taken from them. That is when the line I had been walking began to fray. Listen to the fire. It is impatient with my pacing. Very well. The story wants a spine. I was born after a victory my brother won, in a house my grandfather would invade, among gods who would fail to keep one another. I was carried away before I could make a memory, trained by a woman whose love is an armory, taught by a war that keeps inventing new reasons for its own existence. I learned to say death to Chronos before I learned to understand the word death. I learned to call strangers family and family strangers. And I learned, slowly and late, that duty is an honest word for a feeling I did not yet possess. The first person who made me feel it was not in the portrait. It was a shade who sleeps in my tent as if she had chosen that place for herself. Dora asks questions like a cat asks to be let out, and then in again, and then out once more. She is companion and mirror, and a constant reminder that identity is not a single conclusion, but a habit that must be practiced. When she laughs, the wards hum. That is not metaphor. The wards approve of joy, because joy is an argument against dissolution. Odysseus tells stories that make my hands itch for rope and oars, and choices you regret and then make again. He talks of gods the way a craftsman talks of weather, an element to be factored, not a master to be adored. He never pretends that the clever way and the right way are the same thing. Some nights he falls silent midway through a tale and stares into the water where the stars have gathered. He asks me if I hear the gulls that are not there, and I nod, and we pretend together, because pretending is also a kind of kindness. Nemesis arrived like a whetstone with opinions. She called me soft with such conviction that I believed her for a week. Then we stood in the same pool, steam weaving the air into curtains, and she said the armor is heavy today, in a voice that did not know where to put its anger. I learned to speak to her without defense. She learned to speak to me without verdicts. Rivalry is a kind of friendship if you give it time and take away witnesses. It sharpens without cutting too deep. It teaches you that respect is not the same as permission, and that pride can be a bandage over a wound you will not show. You see what is happening. My voice is changing. It has moved from the measured phrases of a student to the plain speech of a woman who is no longer trying to win a grade. It is not that I love Hecate less. It is that I have begun to love others, and that love has altered my grammar. Shall I speak of the sirens? I will, because they taught me a lesson I needed. Not every obstacle is an enemy. Sometimes the world simply wants to sing and does not care that you have a war to prosecute. Sometimes art is a blockage. Sometimes beauty is rude. I wasted breath on speeches no one who was enjoying themselves could hear. I left that place vexed, not by danger, but by irrelevance, and it is humbling to admit that irrelevance can sting worse than a wound. It is healthy to be ignored. It teaches scale. Shall I speak of the oldest lesson? The first time I faced him in the house that should have been mine to wander and choose, he looked at me as one examines an hour and decides it is beneath notice. Time does not hurry. It makes others do that work. He praised my training the way a gentleman praises a well-made comb. He threatened kindness like a knife wrapped in silk. He reminded me that I did not know the faces in my portrait. He wanted me to continue on the line that would bring me back to him forever, predictable and punctual, an enemy who arrives on schedule. I killed him as one kills a storm, by enduring it. He put himself together again, as storms do. The second truth of my life is that endings are not a resource you can spend only once. If that sounds like despair, it is not. It is clarity. Once you know you will have to do a thing again, you do it properly, with systems and patience and tools you can hand to others. You stop expecting the world to reward you with a conclusion. You start building continuance that belongs to you. I began to ask questions that made my friends wary and my enemies interested. Prometheus said something to me that I will not forget, that peace for mortals is not the same coin as pride for gods. He said it as a challenge, not an invitation. He fought me like a teacher who sets the test he hopes his best student will fail, because failure forces one more page to be read. He was wrong in ways that make him useful, and right in ways that make him dangerous. Eris is wrong in ways that are tiring. There is a difference between argument and noise, and I am trying to learn which to ignore. Somewhere between the second and third time I crossed the sea rift and unlearned how to breathe and learned again, I realized that I had begun to think of mortals not as debris of divine conflict, but as the point. They are the measure. If we cannot answer to them, our victories are arrangements of furniture in a burning house. This is not the sort of thought a dutiful student keeps. It is the sort a woman admits to herself when she is tired of being pleased with her own discipline. I wish I could tell you that I walked back to Hecate and spoke my mind like a champion reciting a well-struck blow. Instead, I asked a question that was really a charge. Did you curse her? I meant Arachne. Please understand, I did not ask to accuse. I asked to know whether the person who had taught me to weigh every cost had weighed this one and found it worth the suffering of a single mortal made into a lesson. Hecate did not waver. She named the choice and owned it. That was the day she stepped down from the pedestal I had maintained for her without her consent. I saw the woman. I loved her more, and loving her more meant I had to stop obeying her as if she were right by nature. So whose path am I truly following? My master's, or the one I am forging for myself? That question has followed me like a familiar in my shadow. In the beginning, I repeated it as a charm against arrogance. Now I say it to keep myself from becoming what I oppose. There is a way to be an agent of change and still be a bully. There is a way to rescue a house and make it a prison. There is a way to put time in chains and call it justice when it is only fear. I will not walk those ways. If I err, let it be on the side of mercy and responsibility, not on the side of tidy stories that make gods comfortable. Here is a small thing that taught me a large thing. A child's toy, carved from olive wood, found in Ephira on a step where no child sat, a spinning top. I turned it in my fingers and felt how balance is an argument against collapse. I set it on the stone and snapped it into motion with 2 fingers the way Odysseus showed me to set a knot. It hummed, and for a moment the street had a center. Then it wobbled and fell. The lesson is not that everything falls. The lesson is that while it hums, it gives shape to space, and that this is worth doing even if no one sees it. We speak of grand designs and prophecies, but most of what makes the world livable is small and brief and repeated. I have begun to repeat small things on purpose. I mend nets for a ghost who insists his hands still know the way. I bind a sprain for a messenger with a reputation for inevitability and poor boots. I light a candle at the edge of the wards where they blur with the night and whisper the names I know of those who went unthanked. I do not do this to be good. I do it because it changes me, and I do not trust any victory that requires me to remain who I was at the start. You asked for the campfire, for the crackle and the glow and the scent of cinder in the hair. You have it, and I am grateful because fires teach a clean logic. They consume and they give. They gather people and they warn them of edges. They require tending, and tending is humility that smells pleasant. I am a princess by technicality, a witch by apprenticeship, a daughter by a portrait's promise and a prison's cry, and a woman by the fact that I have begun to decide what I do with my hands when no one is watching. If I sound confident now, it is because speaking this aloud takes the weight off the words. Confidence is not certainty. It is a way of walking that keeps the hands free. I am still learning to keep them free. Let me give you one more picture, then we will bank the fire and let the night keep what belongs to it until dawn. I returned to Tartarus on a day when the air above had smelled of salt and iron and grief. I had held a broken cup in a broken house and listened to winds that did not blow. I had spoken to Hecate not as a supplicant, but as a partner. I had made Nemesis laugh against her will, which I count as a sign that the world can be repaired in places. I stepped onto a floor that had once rung with my father's stride, and now echoes only with time's patience. He greeted me by my title. I answered with my name. He told me I would fail again. I agreed. He told me failure proves fate. I told him repetition is a form of practice. In the second measure of our exchange, I felt the moment open, that smoothness I told you about, the one that means a correct action is possible. I did not seize it as I had done before, with all the hunger of a child on a straight road. I let it pass and watched what it wanted from me. It is a strange skill to decline a perfect moment because it belongs to an old version of your plan. He frowned, not because I had harmed him, but because he could not predict what I would prefer next. That was the first victory no blade could mark. It is a small one, and it is mine. It is late. The wards are drowsing. Chronos has sung himself silent. Dora will scold me for letting the kettle run too long, and then drink the last of it with exaggerated suffering. Odysseus will say that the night is a better listener than morning. Nemesis will claim she did not wait up, and then ask if I learned anything useful. Hecate will be awake because she never truly sleeps, and she will ask if I have tended to the circles and if my breath is steady, and if I know the cost of what I intend next. I will answer yes, and then I will ask her to walk with me to the hedge, to look with me at the place where the wards meet the dark, and to tell me, not as headmistress, not as God, but as the woman who chose me, whether she is willing to let me choose too. If she says no, I will go anyway. If she says yes, I will hold that yes like a star kept in a pocket to check the road by. I will descend again, or ascend. The words matter less than they used to. The circle remains, but I am no longer trapped by its single path. I have begun to draw lines across it, to make a web that can catch what falls. Time will come, as he always does. I will go, as I always have. Between his coming and my going, there is space to decide who I am. When the embers are right and the night asks for a second half, I will tell you what waits beyond the hedge and above the sea, and how a question asked at a ward line becomes an answer shouted on a mountain, where gods remember how to be ashamed. Yes, the word answers more than a question. It answers a life. Yes to choosing. Yes to paying. Yes to walking even when the path does not offer the courtesy of becoming a road. I told you I would ask her to stand with me at the hedge. I did. The hedge is less a hedge than it is a thought that has learned to keep its shape. We stood where the brush becomes intention, and the night leans in to learn what it can. I said, "Will you let me choose?" She said, "I will watch you choose, and I will not intervene unless your choice destroys what you vowed to protect." We stood together with that answer between us, like a blade laid carefully on a table. It was not permission. It was trust with conditions. That is better. Permission can rot into ownership. Trust is a house with windows. After that, the days stopped pretending they were separate. I returned to the surface first, because the wound there would not clean itself. Ephora had begun to speak a new language of cracks, mortar confessing, wood forgetting verbs. I walked its streets, and where I could put a thing to rights with a charm or a stitch or the simple labor of hands, I did. A broom that remembered sweeping, a door that remembered closing. I did not call this mercy, I called it practice. Each repair is small, but smallness is not the same as insignificance. Prometheus once told me mortals measure what matters by whether it can be held. He meant it as a criticism. I took it as instruction. The gods had begun to rustle on the mountain like birds deciding whether to fly or gossip. They sent blessings with strings, and the strings were praise braided with anxieties. I accepted the power and refused the anxieties. You can do that once you know the difference. Nemesis met me in the rift and asked if I was ready to be judged. I told her judgment implies a fixed law, and I was not yet convinced that the laws we have inherited deserve such reverence. She snorted. She said, "You are insufferable when you are brave." I said, "And when I am afraid," she said, "you are quieter. I prefer that." Then she walked with me to the edge where the sea has taught stone how to endure without mistaking endurance for approval. We looked at the horizon as if we had the right. It was not ours. We looked anyway. I tell you these things because the great events are made of little ones stacked like firewood. We speak of chronal prisons and curses unraveled and thrones reclaimed, but those are the faces of the mountain, not the steps carved into its side. The steps are what will cut your feet if you are careless. They are also what will carry you if you are humble. When the acceleration came, it did not announce itself with trumpets or omens. It arrived as a pressure in the air, the way a storm conveys its body long before its edges. The wards at the crossroads re-pitched their hum, as if a hand had pressed them gently at the throat. Hecate came from her circles with chalk under her nails and eyes that had counted too many variables. Odysseus set his cup down before it was empty. Dora, who never sits still unless mischief is brewing, curled into the corner of my tent and pretended to sleep. Even Phrynos was quiet, which is, I must tell you, statistically astonishing. Time had tired of patience. Chronos gathered his attention toward Olympus and Tartarus at once, and the world between, which is to say, the world, began to thin like cloth pulled from both ends. The dead forgot which way to walk. The living forgot which way to fear. The gods forgot which way to apologize. Only mortals remembered to grieve on schedule, and even then, the schedule lowered its voice. We made a plan precisely because plans fail with such informative clarity. Hecate would anchor the crossroads and keep the hedge from deciding it preferred to be elsewhere. Nemesis would carry a message to those on the mountain who still remembered that oaths are instruments and not ornaments. Odysseus would do what he always does, which is to wrest advantage from the uncooperative and pretend he had meant to all along. My task was dull in description and sharp in practice, to descend, endure, ascend, decide. Prometheus came to meet me where the path splits and tries to hide the fact. He did not stand as a foe that day. He sat on a rock like a mason, examining a wall, and said, "I have been wrong in useful ways." I said, "Proceed." He said, "I told you that mortals might have fared better under Titans. That was true for some, false for others. Truth is not improved by being averaged." I said nothing, which pleased him, because he distrusts agreement the way fishermen distrust a sudden silence in waves. He said, "I also told you that you must be forged by resistance. That remains true. But I failed to say what the forging is for." He looked at my arm, which gleamed like a lesson. He said, "A tool is made for work, not for exhibition." He meant, stop fighting merely to prove you can. I descended. In Erebus, the trees had relearned how to bleed. They bent toward me as if to apply pressure. I moved with them and took their help. In Oceanus, the pipes sang wrong notes and the water threw tantrums. I timed my breath and turned tantrum into tide. In the morning fields, sorrow had become contagious again, and the shades begged without voices. I walked with my hands open and refused to take more grief than I could carry. This is important. To refuse is not cruel when refusal is a ration. The world does not benefit when a single spine takes on what 100 were meant to share. At the foot of Tartarus, where hallways remember old footsteps by the dents they keep, I found him waiting with courtesy. He gestured as if he had placed an extra chair. He said, "Granddaughter," and made the word sound like a formality arranged between diplomats who do not share a language. I said, "Chronos," and made the word sound like a stone that had been named before it was lifted. We complimented one another's inevitability. It is the only compliment we have in common. He showed me my family again. He is proud of that exhibit, as men who collect things are proud of the piece that makes the others make sense. Their stasis had grown more refined, no longer the crude amber of first conquest, but a delicacy of captured motion, like a thought trapped before it can decide not to be cruel. My father's hand had learned a new degree of reaching, my mother's gaze a new degree of turning towards something that had not yet entered the room, my brother's mouth a new degree of preparing to speak and reconsidering. The Titan looked at me to see whether I would learn a new degree of begging. I did not. I said, I know them now. It was not a bluff anymore. He blinked, which is, when you are time, a confession. There are battles that are sermons, and there are battles that are negotiations, and there are battles that are the only language two parties share. This one was all three, which is exhausting but effective. He sought to demonstrate the futility of effort by making the room obey clocks only he could see. I sought to demonstrate the futility of clocks by acting in measures only I could feel. He elongated, suspended, resumed. I shortened, refused, redirected. He summoned golden edges that slice meaning into pieces. I answered with circles that recall meaning from fragments. When the room slowed to show my limits, I used the space to braid what I had not had time to braid before. A working that was not merely a strike or a seal, but an assertion. Witchcraft, as I practice it, is not trickery. It is grammar. I corrected his sentence. I did not kill him. I do not pretend I could. I did make him step back in a way time should not have to step. He presented this as magnanimity, the way a tyrant presents a tax as a gift. He said, I will allow you this movement. I said, your allowance is the lie you tell yourself to avoid acknowledging that you were moved. I left him angry. Anger looks ill on inevitability. It makes it resemble choice. Above, the acceleration had crested. Olympus cried out in clear notes you could almost call music. Nemesis had pushed through her pride and put the weight of her name where it would jam a hinge. Hecate's circles smoked, but they held. Odysseus had convinced three reluctant gods that prudence is not cowardice, and that preparation is neither an insult nor a prophecy of failure. Dora had moved my portrait so that the faces caught the morning before the morning had properly arrived, which I choose to interpret as hope. I ascended to the mountain that believes speech is the same thing as law. It had changed very little. That is the mountain's trick, to remain gorgeous while refusing to learn. They met me with rhetoric. I met them with the simplest litany I know. What I had seen, whom I had lost, what I had mended, what I had refused, and why. I said, if you ask me to rescue you, you must accept the condition common to all rescues, that the rescued change. Some bristled as cats do, back arched, hair insisting on being larger than the skin can justify. Some listened because listening is their vanity. It allows them later to claim wisdom as inheritance. One or two understood. That is enough. Revolutions do not begin with cheers. They begin with a person who cannot bear to nod anymore. Prometheus stood with the gods he had offended 1,000 times. He said, I have wagered on you in a way that looks like betrayal from every angle. I said, then collect your winnings by being quiet. He smiled, as if quiet were a coin he could bear to spend. Eris tried to turn the gathering into a contest of interruptions. I let her. Chaos exhausts itself when it cannot find a mirror. When she began to repeat herself with increasing cleverness, we stepped over her thunder like a rope left across a path. She will brag later about how she dominated the discussion. Let her. If you cannot stop a story from being told, make sure it is told at a harmless volume. The mountain demanded proof of duty. I gave them the only proof that changes gods, limits. I told them what we would not do in their name. We would not render mortals into examples. We would not turn misfortune into parable to absolve our laziness. We would not confuse order with obedience, and we would not permit shrines to become shields against accountability. Then I did the thing that made them quiet. I pledged myself to the enforcement of those refusals. A refusal is only air until someone pays to keep it standing. For the climax, you want a spectacle, and I will not give you one because spectacle is a thief. I will give you the truth. I walked into the chamber where the curse of fate knots itself and declares the knot to be divine. There were shears there and threads and a book that writes itself only to choose which scripts to deny. The book is not evil. It is careful. That is nearly as dangerous. I did not tear its pages. I did not set the threads on fire. I did what my training and my errors and my love had prepared me to do. I argued with the grammar. Hecate says spells are not commands. They are arguments addressed to reality. If reality respects you, it listens. If it loves you, it answers. If it fears you, it pretends not to hear. The fates are reality with excellent posture. I made my case with the courtesy due to peers and the audacity due to jailers. We debated exception, precedent, and harm. I presented the surface. Children's toys waiting for hands, cities keeping time without clocks, grief ripening too early because someone had stolen the shade from the garden. I presented the underworld, wards hardening into walls, trees asked to do the work of iron, sorrow taught to eat the living. I presented Olympus, radiance turned into entitlement, memory hoarded until it soured. Then I did the impolite thing. I spoke for mortals. Gods are offended when others presume to speak for them. Mortals are offended when no one does. I said, if your function is to preserve the pattern by which lives make sense, then you have failed, and your failure is not sacred. I said, if your courage is to maintain rules, then you must accept that rules are instruments, not relics. I said, if you love order more than you love the ordered, you have confused service with pride. They answered, with risk. They said, if we let you loosen this knot, others will loosen knots for worse reasons. I said, yes, that is what freedom does to tidy stories. Then I offered what I had not offered anyone else. I offered to be bound by the costs of my request. If mortals suffered because of my loosening, I would be the one to come and face the balance. If gods shirked because freedom gave them a new excuse, I would be the one to deny them sanctuary. If the knot, once loosened, invited abuses, I would learn to tie new knots that restrict harm without strangling breath. It is an ugly bargain because it produces work. They like bargains that produce worship. They agreed not because my rhetoric was perfect, but because the book had already begun to write differently while I spoke. Arguments do that when they are true enough. The shears do not cut themselves. The hand must decide. I made the cut. It was small. It was exactly where it needed to be. The world did not tear. It sighed. When I stepped back into the air of the crossroads, Dora was laughing and crying in the same sound, which is a thing shades can do when permission returns to their ribs. Hecate stood with her hand behind her back, so she would not reach for me as if she were my mother. Nemesis leaned against a post and looked unimpressed, so she would not be unmade by relief. Odysseus tipped his cup and did not drink, which is another way to toast. Chronos, who reserves his celebrations for data-supported outcomes, croaked twice in rapid succession. You want me to tell you that my family walked out of time's amber like actors taking a bow. I cannot tell you that. The knot I untied was not theirs. The knot that held them was woven by a pride older than any craft. I returned to Tartarus because repetition is not a failure when each repetition leads somewhere. Chronos was not surprised. He was annoyed, which can be mistaken for surprise if you are generous. He said, "You cut a thread. I have spindles enough to replace it." I said, "You mistake threads for fates, and fates for leverage." He said, "You mistake defiance for law, and law for mercy." We are both right enough to continue. I did not argue further. I worked. What breaks a prison made of moments is not one act, but many. Distributed across a geometry only the prisoner can learn by tracing. I walked the house that was not a house and taught it to forget him in certain corners, small treacheries any palace knows, a hinge that prefers not to squeal, a carpet that remembers other feet and daydreams while he passes, a wall that refuses to reflect his profile exactly. Petty? Completely. Effective? Yes. Tyrants require the compliance of furniture. When furniture begins to sulk, empires wobble. Then I did the impolite thing again. I spoke to my family as if they were listening. I said, I am Melinoë. You do not owe me anything. I am not here to cash in on blood or legend. I am here to present you with a choice when choice returns. If you accept help, it will not be a debt. If you refuse it, I will be disappointed in several complex and private ways, but I will not hold it against you. My father's mouth, fixed in almost speech, moved a fraction toward a word no one but I could hear. My mother's gaze, fixed in almost turning, found a degree closer to the place I stood. My brother, whose laughter and tales once made me dislike those tales, remembered a smile that was not for an audience. Chronos did not notice these small defections. Pride is deaf at low volumes. The confrontation you desire, the great final one, arrived not as a duel, but as a choice of instruments. I could have tried to break the amber with the same grammar I used on the knot, reason sharpened to a ritual's edge. I could have hurled torque against torque until one yielded. Both would have satisfied the appetite for endings. I chose our older magic. I chose witness. Witness is the power mortals wield when they have no other. Witness says, I see you, and in seeing you, I refuse your story's monopoly on meaning. Witness is what mothers do when they wait at harbors. It is what friends do when they keep the lamplight burning and pretend to read. It is what gods rarely do because we are fed too often on attention, which is not the same thing. I sat in the halls of time and did nothing except attend. I watched for the seconds he shed like dandruff. I collected them. I placed them where they would be noticed by the house rather than by him. Houses are better at witness than gods. Time slipped on a step he had always taken without looking. He corrected, elegantly, as men who are certain of their dignity do. But the step remembered. The step told the wall told the air told the amber told the faces. Their almosts expanded until almost became a corridor. I did not drag anyone out. I had promised not to turn rescue into debt. I stood at the end of the corridor and spoke again, simply this time, as one speaks to a child who has been taught that doors are ornaments. Come if you wish. My mother came first. Persephone walks as if every step is a question for the soil and an answer for the sky. She put her hand to my cheek and said my name, as if it had been teaching her mouth this shape while frozen. My father came next, and shame walked beside him. And I refused to receive the shame because it was not my feast to eat. He said, daughter, and I let him have the word. My brother came last, not for drama, but because he is polite about thresholds and does not like to crowd them. He looked at my arm and then at my face and said, we have a great deal to say to one another, and some of it will be disagreeable. I said, good. Chronos did not rage. Raging would have conceded that he had lost something he valued. He smiled the way men smile when a chess piece is removed and they have remembered 3 counters. He said, this returns us to the original game. I said, game's end. He said, not this one. I said, not for you. We left the house that had been a larder for his vanity. We did not place a banner. We did not kneel. We did not look back, because looking back feeds certain myths I have no interest in dignifying. Hecate met us at the threshold, and her eyes did the thing she does not allow them to do when she believes someone is looking. Nemesis said, are we done then, in a tone that meant, are we safe? Odysseus made a joke so broad it could carry enemies and friends without throwing either. I expected to feel finished. I did not. I felt employed. The resolution you require is not an ending. It is a decision to turn the line into a practice into an institution, and an institution into a habit sturdy enough to survive our failures. We set about the dull glory of building. Hecate and I redrew the hedge so that it welcomes what must pass and bars what must wait. We wrote new circles that allow mortals to petition without prostration. We taught shades that their stories are currency they may spend where they wish rather than tribute they must pay for passage. We told Olympus that blessing is a verb measured by outcomes, not a noun awarded by pedigree. We told Tartarus that it will not be a throne again, only a place where certain lessons are learned by those who require them, and never more than they can bear at once. Prometheus asked to help, and I said yes with the condition that help would sometimes look like silence. He agreed, because he is tired of rightness that accomplishes nothing. Eris wandered off to invent a grievance she could nurture like a sick bird. She will visit when she needs an audience. We will offer tea and inattention. Dora remembered something of her mortal life and lost it again and did not grieve as sharply as before. She said, "Perhaps identity is a dance and not a statue." I said, "I hope so. Statues break." Phrynos learned a new rhythm for his song that he employs when a ward is behaving. I have yet to discover how he accomplishes this. My current hypothesis involves a conspiracy among frogs and thresholds. Nemesis and I took evening walks to the hedge. We argued pleasantly about punishment and consequence. She believes consequence should have the shape of the harm it answers. I believe that tempting symmetry often flatters the avenger rather than heals the world. We compromised by inventing a practice neither of us would have desired alone. She makes me cruel enough to cut. I make her gentle enough to bandage. We are still learning. Love is the name for this education when it does not admit to being a lesson. With my family, I refused ceremony and accepted difficulty. My father apologized 3 times in one day and then stopped for a while because pride needs to breathe between humiliations. He has begun to work, which is the only apology that accumulates interest. My mother keeps gardens in places that have never known the word, and when flowers stubbornly refuse to grow, she teaches the soil to enjoy moss. She says, luxury is not abundance, it is relief. My brother says less than people expect of heroes, and more than people expect of men who are listening. The last I will say of Chronos is this: he remains. I do not delude myself. Time does not retire. He is less secure in his swagger. He has learned that the house is treacherous and the steps gossip. He knows that witness is an instrument he cannot seize without forfeiting the mask he wears. He has become wary of small things. This is an improvement. Gods and titans should always be wary of small things. Small things are how the world happens. You ask for conclusions because the night will end soon and endings comfort us with their architecture. I will give you conclusions and then take them away in the same breath because that is honest. I am no longer only Hecate's student. I remain her student because the subject is inexhaustible and because love without humility is a tyranny of two. I am no longer only the princess of the underworld. I remain a daughter because even if I had refused the word, it would have followed me with the patience of water finds stone. I am no longer only the witch at the cauldron measuring ash and silver and breath. I remain a witch because grammar saved more lives here than swords did. Whose path am I truly following? My master's, or the one I am forging for myself? I can answer now without cleverness. I walk the path I was taught until the place where it harms those who have not been consulted. Then I leave it. I walk the path I invent until it begins to flatter me for inventing it. Then I question it. If a path cannot survive being questioned by the one who walks it, it does not deserve the feet that keep it smooth. What do the gods owe mortals? We owe attention that is not hunger. We owe restraint that is not fear. We owe aid that does not turn into theater. We owe apologies that do not require applause. We owe silence when our words make everything about us. We owe speech when our silence would make everything worse. We owe, most of all, the willingness to be measured by those who are small enough to be precise. What do I owe myself? I owe the discipline to keep learning. I owe the kindness of refusing to define my worth by victories I cannot maintain. I owe the leisure of joy that does not justify itself. I owe my arm gratitude without romance. It is not a symbol, it is an instrument. I owe the girl I was the dignity of admitting she did her best with the tools she had. I owe the woman I am the risk of changing those tools when better ones are forged. Hecate often asks, at the end of a working, do you know the cost? I do. The cost is that we must remain awake. We do not get to sleep inside our answers. Sleep there long enough and answers become chains. Rest, yes. We must rest, but rest is different from surrender. I light the kettle again because the night deserves a second cup, and because Dora will complain if the leaves grow stale, and because Odysseus will wander by with a story about sails he stitched when he was too proud to ask for help, and because Nemesis will pretend she came for judgment and stay for warmth, and because Hecate will count my breaths from a polite distance and be satisfied when the number pleases her. I tend the fire because tending is how I pray. I say moonlight guide you because moonlight is honest about what it can and cannot do. It reveals. It does not drag. It asks you to decide where to place your feet. Time will come. He is punctual. He will find me here or elsewhere. He will call me by my titles, and I will answer with my name. He will ask me to play the old game, and I will move a piece he did not know had learned to move. I will continue to loosen knots that strangle and tie knots that keep safe. I will continue to make witness into the kind of power that does not intoxicate. I will continue to love in ways that make work instead of tragedy. I will continue to be disappointed, and I will continue to be surprised, and I will continue to be employed. The embers are at their best color now, the one that makes iron think of blood, and blood think of iron. The wards are awake enough to listen, and drowsy enough to forgive minor offenses. Chronos has fallen asleep mid-argument with a beetle, and will resume in the morning as if no pause had occurred. The hedge holds. The crossroads keep their promise. The mountain sulks and learns. The sea insists and teaches. The house breathes. The book writes and waits for someone to disagree. The shears rest, which is all we can ask of instruments. If you were to ask me for a blessing, I would not give you one. I would give you a practice. Stand where a threshold is trying to be born. Door, hedge, harbor, idea. Ask what passes, ask what waits, and ask why. Tend the fire that keeps people honest about their distance. Refuse theater where work is needed. Make small things bold. Be gentle first, and then be exact. And when time calls you inevitable names, answer with your own voice until he must adjust his watch. That is all for tonight. Moonlight guide you to your bed and not to your pride. Moonlight guide you to the questions that do not flatter you. Moonlight guide you to the people who will love you in the form of a task and not a pedestal. I am Melinoë. I am not finished. I am not beginning. I am working. Sleep if you can. If you cannot, sit with me until the coals turn gray and the hedge decides to become morning. Then we will put water on, and Dora will roll her eyes, and Nemesis will pretend to have been awake all night on purpose, and Hecate will pretend that she did not watch over us, and Odysseus will pretend that he was merely passing by. We will all pretend a little, so that our truths will not break their cups. Then we will drink, and we will walk, and the path will correct us where we are wrong, and we will correct the path where it is cruel.